Okay, welcome to AI TV. Today we're at the Co-Create event here in Langa in Cape Town. And I'm going to introduce you to Monika Bielskyte, who's a futurist. And we were on the same panel debate earlier on talking about pros and cons of 4IR. So welcome, Monika.
Thank you so much.
So you were very on the side of the debate around proper ethical use of these newer technologies, and obviously as a futurist, what's your take on 4IR and where are we heading? Are we heading in the right direction or the wrong direction?
Yeah, so I guess to start with, not just for ethical use, but for ethical design to start with, right? Because first we design things and then we use them. And I think all of our cultural and political biases end up embedded in the very design. I think we fetishize technology a little too much, and I always try to bring people back to sort of the reality that technology is an extension of our biology, right? From eyeglasses to AR glasses, from slingshots to satellites. These are all just tools. This is technology too, right? These are just tools that we use.
That's very useful technology right now.
100%.
35 degrees today.
That's why we're sweating, right? So it's very important to understand what type of cultural biases, what type of political biases, what type of social biases end up being embedded in these very tools that we design, because that closes off certain use cases at the very essence. And we have to go into the process, okay, who is at the table making those decisions? And who is excluded. And that exclusion doesn't just go by skin tone or gender. It's also exclusion by abilities, by sexuality, by sort of educational background, so on and so forth, right? And if we are aiming to design products, technologies, platforms that are global, the people that are designing them need to represent those multiple points of view. And it's not some kind of charity work. In fact, it is making a product better. It will make also your business better. If you look at business not just as your quarterly returns, but if you look to build a long-term lasting business in the kind of age where your customers are actually talking back to you, right? It's not the kind of age anymore where you can just swamp people with products or media and they will just eat all that up, right?
And in the debate, we actually used the example of newspapers. I mean, newspapers is very old technology, but actually, based on the choices of an editor and the owner, you can get some very biased information reaching the population. So
that's actually a subject matter I feel very passionate about, because I was born in what was Soviet Union at the time, and grew up with the stories of Second World War, concentration camps, and the Gulag, Siberian gulags, because my family was personally affected by all of that history. And my father was quite staunchly anti-communist. And what's really interesting, right, is that obviously propaganda has always existed. Religion is the sort of the initial propaganda, you could say. But I always struggle with saying something is better or worse in different periods of our history. I think it is different, right? And so propaganda has always existed. Newspaper propaganda has existed, TV propaganda has existed, radio propaganda has existed, but it was fundamentally different. So let's say, picking this very precise example of my family, if you were anti-communist, in the times of the Soviet Union, first of all, you had to really watch what you say, or you're going to end up in prison or on a psychiatric ward. But if you were anti-communist, essentially you just had to refute that one sort of centralized source of this information. Hopefully you didn't eat up the very opposite of it, which is like capitalist propaganda coming from America. And you could somehow try to navigate the truth. What is happening today is much more complex, right? In a way, it is democratization of propaganda, right? And that propaganda even becomes untraceable. That's the whole issue with 2016 sort of Facebook scandal, because they were serving the kind of ads that when investigations started, they would not even deliver, right, to the judges for us to see what type of advertisement was being served to people.
So transparency is absolutely key in this new area. Things are happening so much more quickly. Transparency and ethics are essential.
And it is coming from every direction. And it's interesting how, in a way also I'm bringing back to what's been happening in Soviet Russia. Vladimir Putin was KGB agent at a time, KGB operative. And in a way, some of his techniques from that era have been brought back also with the contemporary technologies. So, back in the day as well, people would end up being swamped with all kinds of contradicting information to feel like there's nothing they can do, and this sort of hegemon of the Soviet Union cannot be combated. It's too powerful to find an alternative for, right? In the current day, he's sort of like Grey Cardinal at a time. Surkov also was the one masterminding a lot of those campaigns of flooding people with all kinds of contradicting
sort of confusing the population, essentially.
Confusing the population, flooding them with all kinds of conspiracy theories. And he also was a fan of a lot of postmodernist thinkers. Deleuze, Derrida, and stuff like that, right? Which is like, you would not think that, right? Steve Bannon is a fan of postmodernist thinking as well, right? And so it's very interesting how a lot of these techniques that initially, that was not Deleuze's or Derrida's goal in writing their books, for it to then be used to subvert democracies and elect these new sort of authoritarian, fascist wannabes.
So, bringing it back to Africa and, where we're heading here locally, what's your take on, we've just come from the debate, what's your take on where we are right now, and really just to sort of wrap up, where are we now, and where do you think we're heading here in Africa?
Well, I think, personally, I do think African continent is going to become the new battleground for targeted misinformation warfare. So just continuing from that sort of political conversation that we had before. And it will be much harder as well to kind of trace it because it also will happen in a multiplicity of local languages too, right? It's kind of what I think
we have 2,000, don't we, here on the continent?
Absolutely, right? And that's what happened with misinformation that was posted, misinformation that led to genocide in Myanmar, the Rohingya genocide in Myanmar, because at that time nobody on Facebook could actually understand the language in which these things were posted. So my point is that these technologies are incredibly potent tools, but if we do not examine before we put out them into the market of all the potential ways how the street could find uses for its things, how instead of just your intended use, it could be absolutely misused. Yeah. If we're not doing that, we're heading towards the dystopian case scenario. Now, if we try to bulletproof everything, it doesn't mean that we're heading towards something only positive. So it's very important to embed resilience within those systems. So the more decentralized they are, the more grassroots they are, the more community-based they are, the better, right? The more iterative they are, the more you're able to catch that bug before it becomes a feature, all right? A malignant feature in your platform or in your technology, the better it is. So I think it's very important to understand that we have to learn from history. History does not repeat, but it absolutely does rhyme. So, human greed and stupidity is endless. So these biases get embedded. We need to continuously challenge each other not because we hate each other, but because we're trying to make this collective effort that is our planetary civilization to not just survive, but thrive. And specifically on the African continent, I think the kind of resilience, the kind of plurality, the kind of multiplicity of perspectives that this offers actually is not an issue, is absolutely an opportunity. It is an asset. It is the strength. It is power. Because as I spoke on a panel, in the Western world, a lot of people take a lot of life's comforts for granted. Where I believe we're headed with a certain upcoming severe financial crisis, extreme climate events like we've never seen before, in a density that we've never seen before, collapse of I believe, upcoming collapse of a number of nation states that right now think that they got all the checks and balances. So we kind of heading towards a precarious world where the type of resilience that African people, that this very continent, that these cultures have, will actually be strength. And so the important thing is not to try and copy-paste things from the Western world, or China at that, but to think contextually and to design inclusively, and always design with and never design for. Thank you.
Well, Monika, fascinating always to talk to someone with a completely different way of looking at challenges and problems, and it was a real pleasure welcoming you to AITV, and hopefully you can join us at the AI Expo in September.
That would be wonderful. I'm always eager to come and spend here time on the continent.
Thanks a lot.